It was an ordinary Wednesday morning in downtown Los Angeles, the kind of morning where the streets buzzed with the usual energy of busy commuters, tourists, and the endless hum of city life. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air inside Café City Lights, a small yet popular spot where locals often stopped by for their daily fix. The baristas were in their usual rhythm, the espresso machines hissed, and the chatter of regular customers created a lively atmosphere. But then, the doors swung open with a force that made the bell above it ring loudly, startling everyone. A man, dressed in a sharp business suit, stormed in with a look of impatience on his face. He walked straight to the counter, where Jake, a young employee with Down syndrome, was preparing a coffee order for another customer. "Hey, this is ridiculous." The man's voice boomed across the cafe, causing several heads to turn. "I ordered a caramel macchiato, and this is nothing like what I asked for. Are you even listening?" Jake, who had been working here for almost a year, looked up nervously. He was always careful with his work, double-checking orders before serving them, but in the hustle of a busy morning, he must have mixed up the drink. He tried to explain, his voice soft but firm. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll make it right. Please, just a moment." But the man wasn't having it. His face turned red with anger as he slammed the coffee cup down onto the counter. "You should have double-checked before you handed me this garbage. Do you even know what you're doing?" The other customers were quiet, watching the scene unfold. Maria, Jake's co-worker and close friend, stood behind the counter, her expression a mix of concern and frustration. She could see Jake was starting to feel uncomfortable, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to fix the mistake. "Sir, there's no need to yell." Maria stepped forward, trying to defuse the situation. "Jake's doing his best. We'll take care of it right away." But the customer wasn't listening. Instead, he leaned over the counter, getting closer to Jake. "I don't care if he's doing his best. He doesn't belong here if he can't even make a simple drink. Get me a real barista." Jake's face flushed, his eyes wide with confusion and embarrassment. He looked around, hoping for someone to step in, but the other customers avoided eye contact, too uncomfortable to say anything. Maria could feel her heart racing. She hated seeing Jake treated like this, and her instinct was to protect him. She wanted to tell the customer off, but she knew that would only make things worse. Instead, she gently placed her hand on Jake's shoulder. "Jake, it's okay," she said softly, but the words felt hollow as the man continued his tirade. The tension in the cafe was palpable. Everyone was watching, some with disapproving glances, others looking away, pretending not to notice the cruelty unfolding before them. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. A voice in Jake's head whispered, a brief moment of distraction from the harsh reality in front of him. He wanted to believe that something better could come from this, that people would stand up for what's right. But right now, all he could feel was the weight of the man's words pressing down on him. What would happen next? Would someone finally stand up for him? And if they did, would it be enough to make the cruelty stop? The door of the cafe opened again, and the bell rang. For a split second, Jake hoped someone else had walked in. Maybe they could help him. But as his eyes drifted toward the door, he didn't expect who would walk in next. Keanu Reeves. Jake had always loved the quiet comfort of working at Café City Lights. It wasn't just a place to earn a paycheck. It was his space, his haven. For Jake, a 25-year-old man with Down syndrome, every small achievement meant the world. And working at the cafe wasn't just a job. It was a symbol of his independence, something he was fiercely proud of. Growing up in a small town in Northern California, Jake had always been different. He had always known that life wasn't going to be as easy for him as it was for other kids. There were things he had to work harder at: reading, writing, even making friends. But Jake never let any of that hold him back. His mom, Karen, had always been his greatest supporter. "Jake, you can do anything you set your mind to," Karen would tell him, smiling as she brushed his hair out of his eyes. "It's okay to take your time, but never stop trying. The world needs your light." Her words echoed in his mind as he stood behind the counter, carefully preparing drinks, making sure each cup of coffee was perfect. Jake had a rhythm he followed every day, a routine that brought him a sense of control and comfort. He loved greeting regular customers by name, knowing their orders without asking. Mr. Thompson, the elderly man who always asked for extra sugar in his black coffee, Mrs. Green, the woman who liked her lattes extra frothy, and even Miss Carson, the young college student who always studied by the window. Jake made it his mission to remember them all. Maria, his coworker, was his closest friend at work. She was one of the few people who truly understood Jake's world. Maria wasn't just a colleague. She was someone who had become like a sister to him. She had watched Jake grow in confidence since his first day on the job, and seeing him struggle with his condition was never easy for her. But she admired his persistence, his optimism. Jake had this way of making everyone around him feel better, of reminding them that life could be beautiful even when it wasn't perfect. That morning, as Jake took a moment to wipe down the counter, he glanced toward the door, watching as a new customer walked in. Mr. Daniels, the man who would change everything. At first, Jake didn't know what to make of him. The customer had seemed a little impatient, but that was nothing unusual in a busy cafe. But when Mr. Daniels began yelling at Jake over the simple coffee mix-up, something in the air shifted. Jake felt his heart race, his hands shake slightly. He had worked so hard to get here, to prove he could handle a job like anyone else. The weight of Mr. Daniels' words felt crushing, especially with the eyes of everyone in the cafe upon him. Maria had always been Jake's protector, but this was different. Jake could see the fear and frustration in her eyes, too. He wanted to hide, to disappear, to escape the situation. But as he glanced around, the customers just looked away, pretending not to see what was happening. It was like no one cared. No one was willing to do anything about it. Jake had heard people whisper about him behind his back, some kind, some cruel, but he had never faced such public humiliation. It felt like every word from Mr. Daniels was like a knife to his heart. "Jake, don't let him get to you," Maria whispered, placing a hand on his shoulder. But even Maria's usual calm wasn't enough to stop the rush of emotion flooding through him. In that moment, Jake remembered his mom's words. "The world needs your light." He had to hold on to that. He couldn't let this one man, this cruel, rude man, take that away from him. Not today. And then, as if the universe had heard his silent plea for help, something unexpected happened. The door opened again, this time with a calm whoosh of the bell above it. Jake looked up, his heart still pounding in his chest, but this time, his eyes widened in disbelief. Standing in the doorway, wearing a casual t-shirt and jeans, was none other than Keanu Reeves. Jake froze, unsure if he was imagining things. Keanu Reeves, the actor, the one whose movies had kept him entertained for years, was standing right in front of him. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The noise in the cafe dimmed. The tension with Mr. Daniels faded into the background. Keanu's eyes scanned the room, immediately landing on the commotion at the counter. His gaze flickered between Jake and Mr. Daniels. Without missing a beat, Keanu walked toward the counter, his presence commanding attention. "Hey, is everything okay here?" Keanu's voice was smooth but firm, a sense of quiet authority in it that seemed to defuse the tension almost immediately. Mr. Daniels, startled by the sudden attention, looked up, momentarily speechless. The anger on his face quickly turned to confusion as he realized who was speaking to him. I didn't ask for him to make my drink wrong. This is ridiculous." Mr. Daniels sputtered, trying to regain his composure. Keanu raised an eyebrow, his expression unshaken. "I think you might be mistaken, sir," he said, his voice calm. "It's not right to treat someone like that, especially not when they're doing their best. Maybe we should all take a breath." For a split second, the cafe went silent. Jake's heart was still racing, but now, it wasn't just from the confrontation. It was from something entirely different. Keanu Reeves had just stepped in. It was like a sudden, unexpected shield had appeared out of nowhere, giving him a moment of relief. Mr. Daniels' mouth opened, then closed. The words he had planned to say seemed to evaporate in the face of Keanu's quiet strength. And in that brief moment, the tide turned. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Jake wanted to laugh at the thought. Who would have imagined that his life would change so dramatically in such a short time? Would this unexpected twist be the beginning of a new chapter for him? Or would it be just another strange day in a long line of them? He had no idea. But one thing was certain. Things were never going to be the same again. The room was thick with tension. Mr. Daniels stood frozen for a moment, his chest heaving with anger, his eyes flashing with defiance. Jake could see the man's jaw tighten, as if he was trying to decide whether to escalate the situation or finally back down. But then, in an unexpected turn, the door swung open again. A soft jingle from the cafe's bell broke the silence, and a few heads turned toward the entrance. It wasn't another angry customer, though. It wasn't even someone who seemed concerned about the ongoing conflict. It was someone Jake didn't think he'd ever see here. Keanu Reeves, the actor, stepped forward, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. He didn't appear to be in any hurry, just moving through the space with his usual calm, as though everything happening around him was merely part of a story. The kind of story that demanded justice, demanded truth. Keanu looked directly at Mr. Daniels and spoke with quiet authority, his voice carrying a deep sense of calm that resonated with Jake and everyone else in the room. "We're done here," he said, his gaze unyielding. For a brief moment, Mr. Daniels didn't respond. He just stared at Keanu, seemingly at a loss for words. His usual bravado had completely evaporated in the face of this unexpected intervention. The powerful actor's words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge. "Do you really want to continue this, knowing you're in the wrong?" It wasn't just Keanu's words, though. There was something more about him that had an almost magnetic effect on the situation. His presence felt like a shield, a force field that protected Jake in ways he didn't entirely understand. Jake, who had been standing there trying to hold back his tears, suddenly felt the weight of the world lift, just a little bit. Maybe it was because Keanu had stepped in, or maybe it was because of the way the cafe's regulars, who had quietly watched the entire exchange, had started to shift. They weren't ignoring what was happening anymore. There was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. People were starting to notice. The man in the suit, still standing at the counter, appeared to falter. His chest heaved with frustration, but his eyes darted to the onlookers, to the unspoken support that had begun to gather in the room. Finally, Mr. Daniels muttered under his breath, "I'm not dealing with this anymore," and turned on his heel. Without another word, he stormed out of the cafe, his tail tucked between his legs. The entire cafe seemed to exhale as soon as the door slammed behind him. It wasn't a victory that felt triumphant or loud. It was one that was quiet but significant. Jake's heart was still pounding in his chest, his hands still trembling. But there was something else now, too. There was relief, mixed with the smallest hint of pride. He had stood up for himself. He had spoken out. For the first time in a long time, he felt like he'd reclaimed a piece of his dignity. Keanu turned toward Jake, his expression softening. "You all right?" he asked, his voice warm and genuine. Jake blinked, still processing the surreal nature of what had just unfolded. The celebrity he had admired for years was standing in front of him, offering a simple yet powerful show of kindness. I think so," Jake managed to say, his voice still a little shaky. "Thank you." Keanu smiled, his eyes reflecting a depth that made Jake feel like this wasn't just about the altercation. It was about something much bigger. Keanu wasn't just helping Jake in this moment. He was helping him see the world in a new way. Sometimes, people need to be reminded that kindness is the real strength, Keanu said, his words hanging in the air like a quiet lesson. "You did good. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than you are." For the first time, Jake felt seen. He wasn't just the employee in the corner of the cafe anymore. He was Jake, a person worthy of respect, of kindness, of standing up for himself. And it was all because of the unexpected ally who had shown up at just the right moment. The cafe slowly began to return to normal, but the atmosphere had shifted. The tension had dissipated, replaced by a strange sense of solidarity. People who had previously been silent were now exchanging nods and smiles, as if they had all been a part of something important. Maria approached Jake, her eyes filled with admiration. "You were amazing back there," she said quietly, her voice filled with genuine pride. "I'm so proud of you." Jake gave a small smile, his confidence slowly building again. "I couldn't have done it without you, Maria. Or Keanu," he added with a nervous laugh. Keanu, still lingering near the counter, overheard. He chuckled softly. You've got this. You've got a lot more strength than you know. Jake felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Keanu had stepped in not because it was the right thing to do in a heroic sense, but because he genuinely cared. His presence, his calmness in the face of chaos, had given Jake the courage to step up when it mattered most. As the cafe resumed its usual bustle, Jake realized something that felt almost like a revelation. He had always thought of himself as different. He had always known he had challenges to face. But today, he had proven to himself that those challenges didn't define him. He wasn't the person who was different anymore. He was just Jake, a guy who worked hard, who did his best, and who had finally learned that standing up for himself was the strongest thing he could do. And as for Mr. Daniels, he was long gone, his angry words fading into the past. What mattered now was that Jake had found his voice, and in the most unexpected of ways, had learned that kindness, and standing firm in the face of cruelty, was the most powerful thing of all. The day might have started with conflict, but it ended with something much greater, a sense of self-respect. And Jake knew, deep down, that it was just the beginning of a much bigger journey. The air was still buzzing with the remnants of the confrontation. People were talking quietly, some laughing nervously at the absurdity of what had just transpired, others whispering amongst themselves, clearly still processing the drama they had just witnessed. But amidst the muted chatter and clinking cups, Jake found himself in a strange state of peace, a strange stillness that contrasted sharply with the storm that had just passed. Keanu's words continued to echo in his mind. Kindness is the real strength. It felt surreal to have had the actor, the icon, stand up for him. Someone who had always been on the outside, someone who had never quite fit in. Jake had spent so much of his life in the shadows of others, afraid to speak up, afraid to be seen for who he really was. And yet, today, he had been forced to stand his ground, to demand respect, not just for himself, but for someone else as well. But there was something deeper still, something that had been gnawing at Jake's mind ever since the argument had ended. He kept replaying the moments where Mr. Daniels had insulted him, where the cruel words had hit him like punches, leaving bruises on his confidence. But what hurt the most, what made him question everything, was the way those words had made him feel so small, the way they had made him question his own worth. It wasn't just that Mr. Daniels had attacked him. It was that Jake had believed, for a moment, that maybe those words were true, that maybe he wasn't good enough, that maybe he didn't deserve to be treated with respect, just like everyone else. It wasn't just the insult. It was the seed of doubt that had been planted. Jake's chest tightened as he walked toward the back of the cafe, away from the murmuring crowd. He needed to catch his breath, to think, to clear his head. Maria, sensing that he needed space, gave him a knowing look but didn't follow him immediately. She kept working behind the counter, making sure everything was in order, but Jake could see the concern in her eyes. She had been his friend for a while, but there was something in the way she looked at him now that made him feel seen in a way he hadn't been before. Her kindness was something Jake had always been grateful for, but today, it felt like it meant more than ever. As Jake passed the door to the staff room, his hand brushed against the cool metal, but before he could pull it open, a voice stopped him. "Hey Jake, you okay?" It was Keanu. He had followed Jake quietly, his presence like a silent force of calm. Jake turned, forcing a weak smile. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just need a second to breathe, you know?" Keanu nodded, not pushing him, but stepping closer, offering something unspoken. "I get it. What happened wasn't easy, but you did the right thing." Jake didn't respond right away. Instead, he ran a hand through his hair, thinking. Keanu had been there for him when it mattered most, but Jake was still haunted by the sting of Mr. Daniels' words. It wasn't easy to shake off insults, no matter who you were. I don't know," Jake said after a beat, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was stronger than that. I thought I could handle it, but when he said those things, it felt like everything I've ever believed about myself was wrong, like I wasn't enough. And his voice trailed off, the weight of it all sinking in again." Keanu's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, his expression full of understanding. Jake, listen to me, he said gently. What he said, that's not your truth. It never was. The fact that you're here, standing up for yourself and others, that's what matters. That's the kind of strength that matters. Jake looked up at him, his chest tightening as the weight of Keanu's words settled in. But I'm not like everyone else. People don't always understand. I'm different. Keanu's eyes locked onto Jake's, and in that moment, Jake saw something in him that he hadn't seen before. A depth of empathy, a recognition of something Jake himself had never fully acknowledged. Different doesn't mean less, Jake, Keanu said, his voice firm yet tender. It's easy to let the world make you believe that your differences are something to hide or be ashamed of. But the truth is, your differences are what make you unique. What make you you. And that's something the world needs. Not everyone is brave enough to be their true selves. But you are. And that's strength. Jake swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He hadn't expected to hear those words, especially not from someone like Keanu. It felt like a revelation, like a light had been turned on in a dark room, illuminating things he hadn't been able to see before. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear this, how much he had been hiding from the truth about himself. I don't know if I can keep doing this, Jake murmured, feeling a lump form in his throat. I don't know if I can keep pushing through the way I've been. Keanu smiled softly. You don't have to do it alone. You've got people who care about you. Maria, the regulars here. And I'm here, too, if you ever need someone to talk to. Jake nodded slowly, feeling a warmth spreading through him, filling the empty spaces where self-doubt had lived for so long. He had been carrying this weight alone, thinking he had to prove something to the world, but maybe the most important thing he could do was to stop trying to be something he wasn't. Maybe the most important thing was to just be himself. For the first time in a long while, Jake allowed himself to believe that it was enough. That he was enough. You've already taken the first step, Jake, Keanu continued, his voice reassuring. You've already faced the hardest part, and you're still standing. That's what counts. Jake took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm washing over him. The storm inside his chest had begun to quiet, replaced by something steadier, something stronger. I think I can do this, Jake said, his voice steady. I just need to remember that it's okay to be me. That's enough. Keanu's smile was small but full of meaning. It's more than enough. And in that moment, Jake realized that the true strength wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about accepting who he was, flaws and all. And in doing so, finding the courage to stand up for himself, no matter the cost. It was a lesson that would stay with him, one he would carry forward as he continued his journey, navigating the world not just as an employee or as someone who was different, but as Jake, a person worthy of love, respect, and kindness. The cafe's bustle continued around him, but Jake felt different now, stronger, like he had finally found the truth he'd been searching for all along. And with that, he was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed the incident at the cafe felt like a shift in the universe. Jake had always thought that the world around him was rigid, unchangeable, a place where he had to fit in like everyone else or be left behind. But with every passing day after Keanu's intervention, something inside him was changing too. He felt lighter, more at ease with who he was. The usual morning bustle in the cafe no longer felt like a chore. It was like the weight of self-doubt had lifted off his shoulders, and in its place was a newfound sense of purpose. Each cup of coffee he poured, each plate he served, no longer felt like an act of just getting by. They were opportunities to engage with the world on his own terms, to embrace the unique perspective that had always been his, and finally understand that it had value. Maria had noticed the change, too. She watched him interact with customers in a way that felt effortless, like the awkwardness he'd once carried was slowly slipping away. He wasn't just going through the motions anymore. He was present. He smiled more, joked with the regulars, and even gave a few of them advice on coffee blends with a confidence that was new, yet undeniably authentic. One late afternoon, after the last of the evening rush had subsided, Maria and Jake sat at a table by the window, the light of the setting sun streaming through the cafe. The city outside had quieted down, and the two of them were enjoying a rare moment of calm. "You've changed, you know," Maria said with a smile, her eyes watching him closely. Jake shifted uncomfortably at first, but then met her gaze. I think I finally see it, Maria. What you've been trying to tell me all along. It's not about fitting in. It's about being who I am. That's enough. That's always been enough. Maria nodded, her smile widening. I've always believed that about you, Jake. I know you've struggled with thinking you had to be someone else to be accepted, but now, look at you. You've found your voice. Jake's heart swelled at her words. It wasn't just that she was a friend. She had been a constant source of support and kindness. Maria had believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself, and now he was beginning to realize how much that had meant. But it wasn't just me, you know, Jake said, looking out the window, the streets now bathed in the soft hues of twilight. I think it really hit me when Keanu stepped in. I thought he was just going to make a quick comment and leave, but he made me see something I didn't know I needed. I thought I had to do it all on my own, but maybe the strength is in knowing when to let others in. Maria's eyes softened as she listened, and Jake could see her processing his words. I think you're right, she said after a pause. Sometimes, it's okay to lean on someone. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. I never realized how much pressure I put on myself. I've been so caught up in trying to prove something, trying to make people see me the way I wanted them to, that I lost sight of what really matters. Maria leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a thoughtful expression. And what's that? Jake smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting for the first time in what felt like forever. That I'm enough, just as I am. That I don't have to apologize for being myself. The right people will see me for who I am. And maybe that's all I really need. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow on the cafe, Jake felt a sense of calm he had never experienced before. It wasn't about everything being perfect. It wasn't about the absence of challenges. It was about understanding that life was never about seeking validation from others. It was about knowing, deep down, that he was worthy of respect and kindness simply for being himself. In that moment, the truth that had been hiding beneath layers of self-doubt and fear finally came to the surface. It had been there all along, waiting for him to acknowledge it. And now, Jake could face the future without the shadow of insecurity hanging over him. He glanced over at Maria, who was watching him with a soft smile, and then his mind drifted back to Keanu's words. Kindness is the real strength. Those words had resonated with him then, but now they had a deeper meaning. Jake understood that strength wasn't just about standing tall in the face of adversity. It was about kindness, both to others and to yourself. It was about forgiving yourself for the mistakes and the moments of weakness. It was about being brave enough to ask for help when you needed it and strong enough to offer it when others were struggling. And that was the lesson that would stay with him forever. Life would always have its ups and downs. There would always be difficult people, unfair situations, and times when he'd feel like he didn't belong. But now, he knew how to face those moments. He would face them with kindness, with a quiet strength, and most importantly, with an unshakable belief in himself. Jake took a deep breath, savoring the feeling of peace that settled over him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he was ready to meet it, not as someone hiding behind fear, but as someone ready to embrace who he truly was. As the evening turned into night and the cafe began to empty, Jake stood by the counter, looking out the window one last time. The city was alive, vibrant, and full of possibilities. For the first time, Jake felt like he was truly a part of it all. His story was unfolding, and he was the one writing it. And as the final customers trickled out and Maria finished cleaning up, Jake couldn't help but smile, knowing that his journey wasn't just about the people who had helped him along the way. It was about his own courage to stand up, to speak out, and to be unapologetically himself. The next few weeks passed by in a blur, filled with small victories and growing confidence. Jake had found a rhythm in his life, one that allowed him to fully embrace who he was without apology. He took pride in the work he did at the cafe, feeling appreciated and respected by his coworkers and regulars. But there was still something inside him that hadn't been fully addressed, a sense that maybe his journey wasn't quite over yet. It was a typical Thursday afternoon, the sun casting long shadows through the cafe windows. The soft hum of conversations filled the air, and Jake was in the middle of wiping down a table when the bell above the door jingled. He didn't expect anyone particularly notable to walk in. Maybe just another customer looking for their usual coffee fix. But when he looked up, his heart skipped a beat. Standing in the doorway, wearing sunglasses and a leather jacket, was none other than Keanu Reeves. Jake froze, his rag still in his hand, eyes wide in disbelief. No way. This can't be happening again. Keanu took a few steps into the cafe and scanned the room before his eyes landed on Jake. A warm smile spread across his face, and he walked over to the counter. Jake, still in a daze, hurried over to him. "Hey, Jake," Keanu said casually, as if they had been friends for years. "Mind if I grab a seat and chat for a bit?" Jake could barely form words. He wasn't sure if it was his surprise or the lingering feeling of awe that made it hard to respond, but he finally managed to stammer, sure. Of course. Take a seat." Keanu settled down at one of the empty tables, looking relaxed as always. Jake quickly finished wiping down the counter and made his way over to him, trying to regain his composure. "I didn't expect to see you here again," Jake said, leaning against the edge of the table. Keanu chuckled softly. "Yeah, I figured I'd swing by. But, actually, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Something important?" Keanu nodded, a hint of seriousness creeping into his expression. "You could say that. I've been keeping an eye on your progress, and I have to say, I'm impressed. I see a lot of potential in you, Jake. You're really finding your voice, and you're handling things with a lot of strength." Jake blinked, feeling a warm rush of gratitude. "I've been working on it. It's been a journey, but I think I'm finally getting there. Slowly but surely." Keanu leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with him. "Well, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. I think it's time for you to take the next step." Jake's heart skipped again. "Next step? What do you mean?" Keanu gave a small smile, leaning back in his chair. "Look, I know you're happy here at the cafe, and it's clear that you've found a space where you can grow. But there's something more out there for you, something bigger. You have this incredible ability to connect with people, to show them the strength and kindness. That's rare, and I think the world needs more of that." Jake was speechless. He hadn't expected this at all. His mind raced, trying to process what Keanu was saying. "I've been talking to a few people about a project I'm involved with, something that's all about empowering individuals with unique skills and experiences. And, well, we're looking for someone who embodies what we're about. Someone who's not afraid to take risks, to step into the unknown, and make a difference." Jake's pulse quickened. "Are you saying?" Keanu nodded. "Yes, Jake. I want to offer you an opportunity to be part of this project. It's not a job in the traditional sense. It's more like a chance to create something that matters, something that's bigger than just yourself, something that could impact a lot of people." Jake stood there, stunned. The words were overwhelming, and for a moment, he wondered if he was dreaming. How could he, of all people, be part of something like this? Keanu must have seen the hesitation in his eyes, because he continued, "I know it sounds like a big leap, but you've got something special, Jake. I believe in you. And if you decide to take this chance, I'll be there to support you every step of the way." The silence between them was heavy with possibility. Jake's heart raced. He had always felt like he didn't belong in the spotlight, like his place was in the background. But what if this was the opportunity he had been waiting for? What if this was the thing that could change everything? He glanced over at Maria, who had been watching the conversation unfold from behind the counter. She was looking at him with a hopeful, encouraging expression. She'd always believed in him, and now it seemed like he was standing at a crossroads, a chance to prove to himself that he was capable of so much more than he had ever imagined. "Keanu," Jake began, his voice shaking with the weight of the moment, "I don't know what to say. This is a lot to process. I've never even considered something like this before." Keanu smiled reassuringly. "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. I just wanted to put it out there. Whatever you decide, I know you'll make the right choice for you." Jake took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. This was the moment where everything could change. The chance to step into something bigger, to make an impact. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth doing ever was. He looked at Keanu, then back at Maria, and finally at himself in the reflection of the cafe's window. This was his time, his moment, and for the first time in his life, he didn't feel the need to shy away. "I'll do it," Jake said, his voice steady, his heart pounding with excitement. "I'll take the leap." Keanu's face lit up with a wide smile. "I knew you had it in you. You won't regret this, Jake. I'm proud of you." Jake's heart swelled with gratitude, knowing that this was just the beginning of something new. A new chapter, one where he could not only make a difference but also truly embrace who he was. As Keanu stood up to leave, he gave Jake a final nod. "We'll talk soon. And remember, kindness is always your strength." Jake watched him leave, his mind spinning with possibilities. The world had just opened up for him in a way he had never expected. The cafe, the city, and even the challenges of the past seemed like they were all part of something bigger, something he was now ready to face head-on. And as the door closed behind Keanu, Jake took a deep breath. He wasn't just stepping into a new opportunity. He was stepping into his true self, bold, confident, and ready to make his mark on the world. The adventure was only beginning. Jake's life felt like it had suddenly accelerated, and the road ahead was unknown, but it no longer terrified him. As the days passed since his conversation with Keanu, the excitement that had once been a nervous flutter in his chest now grew stronger, transforming into a palpable sense of purpose. He had made the decision to take the leap, to step out of the shadows and embrace something larger than himself. But he knew that the real challenge would begin the moment he left his comfort zone for good. He still worked at the cafe during the mornings, but his afternoons and evenings were filled with calls, meetings, and the preparations for the new project Keanu had mentioned. It wasn't just a job, it was a movement. Keanu had connected Jake with a team of like-minded individuals, all working towards the same goal: to empower people with disabilities, those who had faced societal barriers, and give them the platform to showcase their talents and contributions. Jake had always felt different, and for most of his life, he had hidden behind that difference, trying to fit in rather than stand out. Now, though, he was part of a team that valued his uniqueness, his perspective, and his potential. He didn't have to pretend to be someone else. He could simply be Jake. The first few days after accepting the offer were overwhelming. Jake found himself in meetings with people from various walks of life: activists, entrepreneurs, teachers, and professionals from all over the country. They were united by a common vision: to show the world that individuals with disabilities, like Jake, had something valuable to offer and deserved to be seen, heard, and respected. Keanu had said that the project was about more than just work. It was about creating a community. Jake didn't fully understand what that meant at first, but the more he dove into the project, the clearer it became. It wasn't about building something for a group of people with disabilities. It was about building a world where people of all abilities could find their place and thrive. It was about inclusion, empowerment, and changing perceptions. One of the first tasks Jake was given was to create a series of workshops. These workshops weren't traditional learning sessions. They were designed to be open, interactive experiences that would allow people to come together and share their stories, their struggles, and their successes. Jake had always loved connecting with people, and the idea of facilitating these conversations felt natural, but it was still daunting. These were people who had faced unimaginable challenges, people who might have been overlooked their entire lives. Could he really lead them? Could he guide them toward discovering their own strengths? One night, as Jake sat at his small desk at home, reviewing the notes for his first workshop, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Maria. "I'm proud of you, Jake. You're doing great things. Just remember to take it one step at a time. You've got this." Jake smiled and put his phone down. Maria had always been there for him, encouraging him to push through his doubts. It was her constant belief in him that had helped him find the courage to accept Keanu's offer in the first place. He had learned so much from her, and now it was time for him to pass that wisdom along to others. The following week, the first workshop began. Jake stood at the front of a room filled with people of all ages, backgrounds, and abilities. Some were nervous, others excited, but all of them shared a common thread. They were ready to share their stories. As Jake introduced himself, he was struck by how familiar it all felt. He had been the one sitting in the audience, unsure of where he fit in. Now, he was on the other side, helping others find their place. The first few moments were awkward, as people hesitated to speak. But Jake remembered what Keanu had said about creating an environment of kindness and respect. He took a deep breath and began by sharing a story from his own life. The story of how he had struggled with his self-worth, of how he had believed for so long that he wasn't good enough. The room fell silent as Jake spoke, and for the first time, he felt like his story wasn't something to hide. It was something that could connect him to others, something that could inspire change. Slowly, one by one, people began to speak up. Some shared moments of triumph. Others spoke of their fears, but each story was important. Jake could see the vulnerability in their eyes, but he also saw something else: strength. Each person had overcome challenges that most people couldn't even imagine. They had learned to fight for their place in a world that often overlooked them. And now, they had the chance to fight together, with a community that accepted them for who they were. By the end of the workshop, Jake felt something shift inside him. The fear and uncertainty that had once held him back had started to fade. He realized that this project, this movement, wasn't just about him giving back to others. It was about creating a space where everyone could grow together, where no one had to face the world alone. As the group dispersed, people stopped to thank him. Some gave him a hug, others simply smiled and nodded. But the words that stayed with him were from a young woman who had been one of the most nervous at the start. "You don't know this, but just hearing you share your story made me feel like I can do this too," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I always thought I was too different, but you made me see that maybe that's my strength. Maybe I don't have to hide anymore." Jake smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment wash over him. This was why he had taken that leap. This was why he had stepped into the unknown. It wasn't just about changing his own life. It was about changing lives, about showing others that their voices mattered, too. As he left the building that evening, the city lights twinkling around him, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He had taken the first step on a journey that would shape not only his future but the future of many others. He wasn't just Jake, the guy who had been working at a cafe, struggling to fit in. He was Jake, a part of something much bigger. A movement toward a world where everyone, no matter their background or abilities, could stand tall, be heard, and make a difference. And as he looked up at the stars above, Jake realized that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to come. He was ready for whatever came next. With the support of his new community, Keanu's mentorship, and the belief that had once seemed so foreign to him, Jake knew one thing for sure: he was never going to hide again. The journey ahead would be full of challenges, but he was ready to face them all. And this time, he would do it with the strength of kindness and the courage to embrace his true self. Jake stood in front of the large auditorium, the buzz of excitement in the air. This wasn't just any room. It was the heart of the conference where the biggest names in the world of advocacy, inclusion, and empowerment would gather. His first real public speaking engagement. This was the moment that Keanu had been preparing him for, the one that would define whether his journey had truly come full circle or if it was simply a dream that had momentarily flickered into view. The room was packed, filled with people who had heard about his work in the workshops. They were waiting for him to speak, to share his story and, more importantly, to inspire them. He could feel the weight of their expectations pressing on his shoulders. What if I fail? But then, as he stood there, he reminded himself of everything he had been through. The doubts, the moments of despair, the long nights of questioning whether he was good enough. He remembered the smile on Maria's face when he told her he was ready to take the leap. He thought of the faces in the workshops, the ones that had looked at him with hope in their eyes, waiting for someone to guide them, just as he had once needed guidance. The doors to the backstage area opened with a soft creak, and Jake turned to see Keanu approaching. He smiled, his calm demeanor instantly soothing Jake's nerves. "You ready for this?" Keanu asked with a grin, his hands in his pockets. Jake nodded slowly. "I think so. Just a little nervous." "Good," Keanu said, his smile widening. "Nerves mean you care. That means this moment matters to you, and that's exactly what will make it great. You've got this." Jake took a deep breath and nodded again, feeling the weight of Keanu's words settle in his chest. This wasn't just about delivering a speech. It was about showing the world who he was and what he stood for. It was about the message that, despite the struggles and setbacks, each person had something of value to offer. As Jake walked onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause. His heart pounded in his chest, but the warmth of their welcome eased some of his anxiety. He took his place behind the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and felt a sense of calm wash over him. This wasn't about perfection. It was about being real, about showing the world his truth. "Hello," Jake said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "My name is Jake, and I'm here today to talk about something that's been a huge part of my life. The power of embracing who you truly are, no matter what anyone else tells you." He paused, letting the words sink in, feeling the collective attention of the audience. It was exhilarating, but more than that, it felt right. "I've spent most of my life trying to fit in," Jake continued. "I've spent years thinking that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong. That because of my Down syndrome, I had to somehow hide parts of myself to be accepted. But the truth is, I was wrong. I didn't need to hide. What I needed to do was embrace who I am. And so do all of you." There was a shift in the room, a palpable change in the atmosphere. People shifted in their seats, some nodding in agreement, others leaning forward, eager to hear more. Jake's words grew more passionate, more confident. It's not always easy to see your own worth. Sometimes, you need someone to remind you that you matter, that your voice, your story, is worth hearing. And sometimes, you have to find that strength in yourself. Because when you believe in yourself, everything else falls into place. The words flowed freely now, almost as if they had been waiting to escape for years. He told them about his journey from the cafe to the workshops, about the moments when he had doubted himself and wanted to quit, and about the people who had helped him believe in his potential. He spoke of Keanu's mentorship, Maria's unwavering support, and the strength he had found in sharing his story with others. As Jake wrapped up his speech, there was a long, heartfelt silence. The audience was still, but Jake could feel their energy. He knew they were with him, feeling his message in their hearts. "I'm here today because I believe we all have something to give," he said softly. "It doesn't matter what challenges we face. What matters is how we rise above them. We are all unique, and that's not something to hide or be ashamed of. It's something to celebrate." The silence broke with a burst of applause. Jake's heart raced, but this time it was with pride. He had said what he needed to say. He had shared his truth, and it felt incredible. As he stepped off the stage, Keanu was waiting for him with a proud smile. "You did it, Jake. That was amazing." Jake couldn't stop the grin from spreading across his face. I don't know what to say. That was a lot, but I feel like something just clicked." Keanu chuckled. "That's the power of speaking your truth. You just connected with all those people in a way you couldn't have before. This is just the beginning, Jake. You've got so much more to offer." Jake looked out at the crowd, who were still applauding and whispering to one another. He felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. It wasn't the applause that mattered. It was the knowledge that his words had reached them, that his message had sparked something inside each person in that room. As Jake walked back to join his new friends and teammates, he felt like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. His journey had been long, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But here, in this moment, he realized that it had all been worth it. This was the life he had always wanted, the chance to be himself, to share his story, and to inspire others to do the same. He didn't need anyone's approval to know his worth. He had found it within himself. And as the crowd slowly began to disperse, Keanu patted him on the back and said, "The world is ready for you, Jake. Keep pushing forward. You've got everything you need to change it." Jake smiled, knowing that he was already doing it.